So Julia Santander, I'm Managing Director of Investments at Echo Enterprises Fund. Echo Enterprises Fund is an impact investor with over 20 years experience in the sector. So we started out officially in 1998 as a sheer experiment of a handful of institutional investors and private investors interested in long-term sustainability, focusing on conservation goals, on environmental protection in Latin America. The fund at that time was really small, $5 million in investable capital. We have since then launched a Fund 2 and a Fund 3 now a year and a half ago, which have more than multiplied our initial investment capital. We are now managing a fund with just over $100 million in investable capital, which for us really is a great reflection of the trajectory of the overall sector, really, because we see that there is more interest in those sustainable sectors and the sustainable products coming out of those sectors, but also from the investor side, more interest to find those sustainable solutions in investment vehicles they can allocate their money to. Personally, we focus almost exclusively on Latin America, on the Andean region and Central America, most of all, wherever we see sort of a confluence of macroeconomic factors that benefit sort of our investment activity, as well as areas of great biodiversity and sort of rich natural resources that need protection and conservation. We work in everything that we call nature-based sectors. So we focus with a big share of our investments on sustainable agriculture, on agroforestry systems, forestry, but also on ecotourism. And over the past years, we've ventured more and more also into tangents, which could be, for example, ag tech or any other business models that support innovative businesses in the sectors where we started out. What we provide is mostly flexible long-term debt and mezzanine instruments tailored to the specific realities of the companies we work with, of the economies where we operate. And what we really try to do is to fill a gap in local capital markets, especially sort of building long-term partnerships with the companies we work with, because that really allows us to go beyond just putting in money into a business and sort of making a financial return, but really sort of work with the company across the three sort of axes that we want to see them build and strengthen, which is their financial performance, but also the social and the environmental impact that they're generating in the regions where they operate. So the impact word for me, I guess, would also be a mix on one side, balance, because we continuously balance a very diverse spectrum of interests. Of course, the financial interests of our investors, our financial interest as an investment fund, but also the interests and sort of long-term perspective of all the stakeholders that are involved, both the entrepreneurs, the teams, but also the communities where they operate. And the second word I would throw in there as well is push, because it's still sort of pushing, I would say, friendly nudging our companies to sort of not lose sight of any of the three sort of focus areas that I just mentioned, but also really make a push to make that investment approach of ours more mainstream as we go along, and really build the track record that encourages more people to take a look at this type of investments, because that is our experience as the fund has sort of replicated and launched another fund and another fund. We've taken most of our investors along since day one, and really based on that sort of data that we could compile and show for to really sort of show that this is not just the vague experiment and idea it was back in 1998, but really sort of has come a long way and is now sort of a viable option for anyone, I would say.
Thank you. So we haven't touched yet on the topic of agriculture and land use and forestry as it relates to CO2. While in the US, those two are listed kind of at the bottom of the list of CO2 emissions, in LATAM and countries like Brazil, they account for a majority of the impact on CO2. And as we know, tragically, fires have destroyed 15% of the Pantanal this month, and many have been affecting the Amazon, which is now edging from carbon sink to a carbon source. So, Julia, your investments play a critical role at balancing economic development as well as conservation and biodiversity. So, tell us a little bit how Eco Enterprises Fund tackles this issue and balances these different need groups.
So, as most of you may be aware, agriculture, forestry, and these nature-based sectors that we invest in are deeply woven into sort of the social fabric of Latin American societies. Most countries in the region still depend heavily on the natural resources, be it agricultural exports or other exports from mining, oil industries, etc. Unfortunately, over the past decades or even longer, I would say there's never been a great appreciation for environmental aspects in these areas. In the bigger industrial production, even like in agriculture, that hasn't been the case because it doesn't have a price tag attached to it, as we all know. And in the broad sort of smallholder segment, which still dominates agriculture across Latin America, it simply hasn't been a consideration because most farmers, most small, medium-sized producers think they can't afford themselves the luxury to consider environmental aspects and just need to focus on plain production and making a living somehow. So what we really try to do with each and every investment that we make in the region is to find innovative and sustainable models for replication. And that is valid for all sectors, be it agroforestry systems or more traditional forestry or large-scale agricultural production or transformation into food and beverage products, etc. So we try to find these examples that show others in the sector that they can build a profitable business and still make a positive impact and have a lasting positive effect in the communities and in the regions where they operate. So we try to really meet businesses in their reality. That's also very important for us, that we remain flexible and sort of in the type of business models as we consider, because we also see that there are many ways to contribute to a more carbon neutral future, to healthier ecosystems, more resilient sort of environments. So we really consider all different angles. For example, here in Colombia, we've invested in a large scale organic citrus operation. And while the organic orchards already sort of provide a huge sort of benefit in terms of environmental health and ecosystem health, we're now working with the company to identify specific nature reserve areas to participate in reforestation efforts, sort of to take that positive impact that they're already having a little bit beyond what they were already intending to do. On the other hand, we work with a company that works in different countries in the region and only sources from small suppliers. So that work that we're, for example, carrying out with this Colombian company, they can sort of push that off to have the smallholders do that work. But what they do is they send their agronomists and they work with those hundreds of small producers on better environmental practices, in enhanced soil health. They implement a monitoring system to ensure that there is no deforestation in the area, that the farmers are sort of aware of how they take good care sort of their land and how they could even on a small scale, but sort of that sums up over the hundreds and hundreds of people the company works with, reforest or implement more sustainable practices that actually contribute to carbon sequestration, because they see a value in it, because they see that their land becomes more productive, that they can get certification that they couldn't access before, and that the company then pays a premium for. In Brazil, because you mentioned the Amazon, we have a long-term investment in a company that we actually invested in under Fund 1 for the first time. That started out as basically a startup at that time and has now grown into a multi-million-dollar company exporting acai from Brazil to the States and selling food and beverage products, smoothies, etc. And they've really sort of started that acai trend. And now maybe, hopefully most of you sort of have tried it in the States. It has become one of the more sort of standard superfoods in supermarket aisles. But they were really the first ones to bring it to the United States. And what they have achieved over the past 15 years is to create a whole economy in the middle of the Amazon, because all the suppliers are local peasant and indigenous communities that work along the Amazon River in the middle of the forest and that wild harvest the berries. When the company started working with them, there was little appreciation for the standing forest sort of behind their river in their houses, because it didn't have a value for them. And they would cut it down if it was more attractive to sell the wood, or they would sell land if companies would move in. And all these areas are extremely exposed to illegal mining, to logging activities, etc. So over the 15 years that the companies worked in the region, they have effectively put under active protection through these communities, like thousands and thousands of acres of pristine rainforest, without ever implementing a formal national park or a government sort of protection program or something. It's really just through the interest and the incentives that they've set for the local communities that they now proactively protect these forest areas, because they see a long-term benefit in that. So we really have a diverse portfolio, and we try to remain very open to really look at new models coming in. Actually, we're also working now more and more on issues like circular economy in the sectors where we work, bringing in these ideas that we see in funds like Ellison's, to sort of inspire our companies even more, or even see where those concepts could maybe result in new business models in these areas that could create additional benefits. And that could be in agriculture, absorbing waste products and find a second use for them, or working sort of in related sectors. We're actually just now looking at a company that works with industrial waste, something that we haven't looked at in the past, because it's sort of out of our nature and sort of rural community focus. But what we've seen across Latin America, a big problem is waste recycling, and landfills are filling up, are taking more space. So they're moving into like across the borders where we so far had sort of more like untouched landscapes. So it becomes sort of more pressing issues that now moves into these rural spaces. So we're now looking at different companies in the sector that also work more in the recycling or waste management systems, benefiting rural areas, however. So for us, it's really all about building examples and building sort of these lighthouses, sort of with the hopes that in 10, 20 years at the latest, sort of there will be no sector left in the areas where we work that can sort of with good conscience continue to pursue business activities that don't include an environmental angle in the activities, because hopefully there will be sort of an opposite example for all of these traditional sectors that we have today that still have sort of limited appreciation for the additional positive impact that they could be creating.
Thank you so much, Julia.